All right, so yesterday we ran into a couple issues. One, this blue quad here refused to arm. So we got to figure out what's going on there. And this red one here, the camera died. I have another Racer 2 camera here, and we'll go ahead and see if we can fix both of those. So first things first, let's get this guy to arm again. The first thing I'm interested in doing is just trying to reproduce the error. So I'll go ahead and plug this in. Quad is plugged in. We got signal beeps. We'll go ahead and make sure that we're on blue, and indeed we are. We get the props off, everything's happy. We're getting nothing on the arm. Okay, so first step is yes, it is still reproducible. What's important is that we understand the flow of signal, okay? So your transmitter itself is sending a wireless signal out to the antennas, which mine happen to be taped down here. Those antennas are feeding into the receiver itself. Out of the receiver, if we zoom in a little closer, actually let's take a look at this one because the quads are the same, but this one has the canopy off already. So the receiver itself is here. We got our little antennas. They're feeding down into the receiver. The receiver then sends its signal out over this yellow line here. It's getting its power and its ground from those other two red and black cables. And then that signal gets fed into the flight controller. All right, so there's a few different things that could be going wrong in this scenario. One is the transmitter doesn't work. Okay, it's not sending signal. That could be either the actual radio inside is dead and it's not physically sending signal. We can test that by plugging it in a different quad and seeing if that quad works. Let's try that right now. Quad instead. Select. All right. And now, if we arm, we arm. Okay, so we are actually getting signal. So the radio, actual physical radio part of this transmitter is not the problem. Which brings us to our next step. It's either the receiver itself is not receiving the signal, or I guess the transmitter is not completely ruled out yet. It could be some sort of corrupted thing with that particular profile of the blue quad. I'm guessing that's not the case, so let's try and pinpoint it somewhere else. So with the blue quad, there's a few different things. One, are we sure we're getting power to the receiver? Is the receiver actually turning on? Two, is the connection from the receiver to the flight controller good? Did that cable get ripped out or kinked or something like that? And then the other thing would be the actual flight controller itself. Is the flight controller itself putting itself into some sort of mode where it won't accept arming? That means either it thinks the gyro is sideways or it thinks some sort of undesirable configuration is set up such that it's trying to protect me, it's trying to save me from a flyaway or from getting myself chopped up by the props. So let's make sure that the thing is powering on. I know this one works, so I'm going to go ahead and plug this one in and we'll look and see what the lights actually look like. I'm going to turn this thing off for now. Okay, so here we are, and the red one, you can actually see right up here next to the wires, we've got a red flashing light right there. So that means that this guy is getting power and it's happy. That flashing means that it is not bound because it can't see the transmitter because I just turned the transmitter off. So that makes sense. Let's make sure the blue one's doing the same. All right, blue one is plugged in. If we zoom on in here, I am not seeing those lights turn on. So I'm going to guess that this has some sort of power issue. Power is not getting to the receiver itself. Now, that could be a couple of things too. Most likely is that the wire between the receiver and the flight controller that has power, so either the red or black wire, got disconnected. That's probably the most likely. But it could be that the flight controller itself, which has a BEC, a battery elimination circuit, that is supplying 5 volts to this receiver, maybe that BEC died, or the pathway to the receiver part that I'm pulling from died for some reason. the trace got chopped or a component fell off or something like that. I would expect to see some more other issues if it was actually the battery elimination circuit. But hey, it's not impossible. It's unlikely, but it's not impossible. The other possible thing is that the receiver itself died. So this thing may have taken some sort of shock, a physical shock by crashing, or there was some sort of electronic transient that happened because motors are just big giant coils. So these slowing down could have dumped a whole bunch of power in there and the capacitor couldn't keep up, and it made the battery elimination circuit crank its voltage way high and pop that thing. That seems unlikely as well. But hey, it's not impossible. And as long as you understand how all of these things kind of connect together, that really, really helps. So let's take the canopy off of this thing and see if we can see anything obvious. All right, we're inside, and the first thing I see is look at how squashed that capacitor is. That's pretty ridiculous. I'm sure this is about as good as useless, and it being tied right across my battery lines, I'm not looking for an internal short in there, so I'm just going to remove this entirely. My stack is also extra held together here with the zip tie, which may have been part of the problem with that capacitor. A crash really must have just come right through this canopy and squashed it. So let's open this stack up and see if we can see anything. There's kind of a jumble of wires going on in there. Okay, so we got the capacitor up out of the way. I'm going to have to chop that right off. And now let's take a look under this stack here and see if we see anything. Plug in these wires a little bit. There we go. And our culprit is found. So the receiver itself was not actually plugged in anymore. Let's see if we can find the pad it was actually connected to down here. Yeah, right there. Come on, focus. Right there. So the wire itself just broke. Not too crazy. The solder joint itself looks pretty decent. It just vibrated and stuff happens. So I'm going to go ahead and just strip this end off just a little bit here and solder right back to that pad, and we should be in business. I'm also going to remove this capacitor. It's probably not doing us any good. That's just a liability at this point, honestly. And hopefully we don't get crazy lines in the video. I'd be shocked if this thing's actually still functioning, doing anything useful. But, all right, so let's go ahead and do that. Cool, so I went ahead and desoldered the capacitor leads from right there. So this guy's just hanging out here off to the side. Hopefully I don't get a bunch of lines in my video now, but we'll find out. Those are all soldered up. This is all set, and we'll just go ahead and plug this thing in. I'm not seeing any sort of issues with bridging or anything like that. One thing you do need to be careful with is as soon as you finish soldering, really make sure that you take a look on the board and don't see any sort of extra slag, stuff like this, that came off when you were going about your soldering business. Here, let's take a look in here. And I don't see any sort of issues other than, I mean, there's a couple components in here that are broken, which is kind of amazing. That one, focus! That one down there. And this component is also chipped. I mean, hopefully it still works, but so yeah, make sure you take a really close look and see that anything that you desoldered didn't kind of, end up in there shorting something you don't want it to short. I'm gonna go ahead and plug this thing back in and see if we get a light on the receiver and see if we can arm it. Winner, we're getting a light over here. That's an excellent sign. And I'm sure that fixed the issue, but let's just confirm. And arming. There we are. We're back in business. Blue quad fixed. So hopefully that helps you kind of walk through the signal flow from the transmitter to the vehicle and from the receiver itself into the flight controller, all that good stuff. If we end up running into an issue like this again, it might not be the same thing. So you got to kind of work your way through the entire chain of signals, and if you can cut it in half, you can know, oh, hey, it's on that side, hey, it's on that side, and really narrow down what your problems are.